was late in the afternoon when she noticed the child for the first time. The sky was painted with shades of orange and pink, and the streets were filled with people hurrying home from work. She was walking back from her job at a small local store, carrying a bag of groceries when she saw a young boy sitting on the curb near the corner. He looked no older than 7, maybe 8. His clothes were torn, stained, and far too thin for the cold breeze that swept through the neighborhood. His hair was messy, and his eyes, wide and cautious, darted around as if he expected trouble to come from every direction. Something about the way he hunched over, hugging his knees tightly, made her heart ache. At first she thought maybe he was just lost or waiting for someone, but as she passed by and then turned the corner, she saw him again the next day in the same spot, the same huddled position. He didn't speak to anyone, didn't approach the passing adults for help, and seemed almost invisible to the world around him. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. The woman worked long hours, and her days were usually filled with routine, but that little boy kept replaying in her mind. She started noticing him on her walks home, always alone, sometimes sitting quietly on the steps of abandoned buildings or behind trash bins where no one would see him. There were moments when she would slow down, trying to catch his eye, and he would glance at her nervously before quickly looking away. She realized he was scared. The fear in his eyes was different from the nervousness of a child lost in a crowd. It was deep, heavy, the kind of fear that weighed down even the smallest bodies. She knew she couldn't ignore it. That evening, after finishing her chores at home, she went back to the corner where she usually saw him. She brought with her a small sandwich and a bottle of water, careful not to appear threatening. When she approached, he flinched, moving a step back, but she spoke softly, her voice steady and gentle. "Hey there, I brought you something to eat," she said. She didn't force him to take it. She simply placed the food on the curb a few feet away and stepped back. The boy eyed her, suspicion written all over his small face, but hunger won over fear. He cautiously picked up the sandwich and took a bite. That small act of sharing food broke an invisible wall between them. She began returning every day, bringing little things. A warm scarf she had, a bottle of juice, sometimes a small toy she found at a yard sale. Slowly the boy began to trust her, though he remained cautious, always scanning the street as if danger could appear at any moment. She learned his name was Eli, though he rarely spoke of himself, and when he did, it was in short, hesitant phrases. The woman's heart ached as she listened to him. Between pauses and tears, he hinted at how he lived with adults who were supposed to care for him but instead hurt him. The details were vague, the stories broken, but enough to make her stomach churn with anger and worry. She knew she couldn't just walk away. She couldn't allow him to be invisible to the world any longer. She decided she had to act. She began documenting everything, keeping notes of the days she saw him, the injuries she noticed, and the brief words he shared. She contacted social services, but as she feared, the response was slow. Calls were returned days later. Appointments were postponed, and the bureaucracy of it all frustrated her. She realized that if she waited for help, Eli might continue to suffer in silence. She couldn't stand idly by. One evening, she invited him to sit on the steps of her building with her while she fixed some tea. She didn't force him into her apartment, understanding that a child who had known fear all his life would be wary of strangers, even those who wanted to help. Over days and weeks, the steps became their small, safe space. She talked gently, not asking too many questions, letting him eat, rest, and even laugh at small things like a bird hopping too close or a dog chasing its tail. She laughed with him too, not loudly, just softly, as a way to show that the world could still have warmth. Through these small moments, she began to learn more about him. Eli had a sharp mind, curious eyes, and a quiet resilience that astonished her. Despite the fear and pain he had endured, he still noticed things around him, asked questions, and sometimes even joked quietly when he felt safe. It was in those moments that she realized that children, no matter how scarred by life, still carry hope in them, fragile but persistent. She started planning carefully. She knew she couldn't legally take him in without going through the proper channels, but she also knew she needed to ensure his immediate safety. On days when she couldn't see him, she asked neighbors to keep an eye out. She created a network, small but effective, of people who were willing to watch for signs of trouble and report anything concerning. She even learned a few tricks to make her interactions less threatening. Small gestures, keeping her voice calm, letting him see she wasn't in a rush. Then came the day that shook her. She arrived at their usual spot to find him trembling, tears running down his face and a fresh bruise forming on his arm. Something had happened at home, something she couldn't ignore. She immediately called social services and stayed by his side, holding his hand, talking to him softly, making sure he knew he wasn't alone. She felt rage boiling inside her, not just for the immediate harm done to him, but for a world that could allow this to happen to a child. But she also felt a deep, steadfast determination. She would protect him no matter what. It was slow work. Gaining his trust didn't happen overnight, and even when social workers came, Eli sometimes resisted, scared of being taken away from the only person who had shown him kindness. She never forced him. Instead, she sat with him, explaining patiently that the people who were supposed to help would ensure he was safe. Sometimes she would tell stories from her own childhood, moments when she had felt afraid, to help him feel less alone. Over time, the walls he had built around himself began to crumble, just slightly, just enough that she could see the child who had been hidden beneath layers of fear. He smiled sometimes, a shy, cautious smile that lit up his face, and he started to confide small details of his life. He talked about wanting to go to school, to read books, to ride a bike, to play like other children. Each revelation made her heart swell with hope and also with sorrow for all the years he had been denied these simple joys. One day she managed to take him to the library, a place he had never been. She watched him run his fingers over the books, eyes wide with wonder, the corners of his lips turning upward as he whispered the titles aloud. It was a small victory, but a victory nonetheless. She realized then that kindness wasn't just about protecting him from harm. It was about showing him the possibilities of life, the simple, beautiful experiences every child deserved. She also taught him small lessons in trust and self-worth. She encouraged him to speak when he felt afraid, to stand up in little ways, to believe that he deserved care and respect. She never pressured him, never demanded that he share more than he was ready to. And slowly, very slowly, he began to believe her, began to accept that the world could hold people who wanted to protect and nurture, not harm. Evenings became their special time. She would prepare a small meal. They would sit on the steps or in her tiny living room, and she would ask him about his day, gently coaxing words and stories from him. Sometimes they just sat in silence, and that silence became comforting. She would hold his hand, feeling the small, trembling fingers, reminding herself that even the smallest gestures could be powerful. And as the weeks turned into months, the bond between them grew stronger. The little boy, who had once flinched at every sudden sound, now leaned on her when he felt unsure. He laughed quietly at her stories, asked questions about things she never thought he would notice, and began to believe just a little that maybe he had a place in the world after all. The woman knew the road ahead would not be easy. The legal system was slow, the child's guardians were dangerous, and the world was often cruel. But she had made a promise in her heart, and promises to children were sacred. She would fight patiently, steadily, and with every ounce of courage she could muster. And in the quiet moments, when the city hummed around them and the sun dipped low behind the buildings, she would glance at him and see not just a frightened child, but a spark of hope, fragile yet bright. That spark was enough to keep her going, to keep showing up, to keep reminding him that he was not invisible, not forgotten, and most importantly, that he was loved. Days turned into weeks, and the woman's life slowly intertwined with the boy's life in ways she hadn't imagined. Every morning she would wake up with a sense of purpose, knowing that someone depended on her, someone small and fragile who had survived too much for his age. Even at work, her mind would wander to the boy, wondering if he had eaten properly, if he had slept, if he felt safe at all. She would sneak glances at the clock, thinking about the moment she would see him again, hoping to notice any change in his mood, in his smile, even in the way he carried himself. Despite her careful efforts, protecting him was not easy. Social services had promised to investigate, but they moved slowly, tied down by paperwork, protocols, and delays. She often felt frustrated, powerless even, as she watched the boy struggle each day. Sometimes she would see bruises that weren't there before, or his hands trembling more than usual. The sight tore at her heart, but she forced herself to stay calm. She knew that if she panicked or acted recklessly, it could frighten him further. She needed to be strong for him, for both of them. Her neighbors began to notice her frequent trips to the corner and her constant attention to the child. Some whispered disapprovingly, wondering why she bothered with that boy. A few even warned her to mind her own business, saying it wasn't safe to get involved, but she didn't listen. In her heart, she knew that no matter what anyone said, she had a responsibility to step in. She could not ignore a child in danger, even if it meant facing criticism or risk. Each evening, when she could finally spend uninterrupted time with him, they slowly built a routine. She would bring him small meals, and sometimes they would sit together quietly, letting the weight of the day settle around them. She didn't push him to talk. Instead, she would tell stories. Stories of her childhood, of small adventures in the neighborhood, of times she had felt afraid but survived. Gradually, he started opening up, telling little bits about his life. He spoke of harsh words, of nights when he cried himself to sleep, and of moments when he had felt utterly alone. She listened without judgment, letting him speak at his own pace. It was during these evenings that she began to notice something remarkable. Despite all the pain and fear, the boy had a spark of resilience. He noticed things others didn't, the way the sunlight hit the pavement, the smell of rain on the streets, the small kindnesses of strangers. He asked questions about the world, about books she mentioned, about how birds could know where to fly. Each question, simple as it was, showed a mind curious and alive, a mind that had been denied so much yet refused to be broken. But the struggle was not only with the boy's past. She had to contend with the child's present circumstances. The people who were supposed to care for him, his guardians, were a constant threat. She saw them from a distance sometimes, yelling at him, dragging him around or leaving him alone for hours. Every sight of them made her stomach twist with anger and worry. She wanted to step in to confront them, but she knew that acting rashly could worsen the boy's situation. Instead, she documented everything, every bruise, every mark of neglect, every word of fear he whispered to her. She kept meticulous notes, photographs where she could, and created a timeline that she hoped would one day help him gain the safety he deserved. One rainy afternoon, she found him shivering under a small awning near an empty lot. His shoes were soaked and he was coughing lightly. She knelt beside him, wrapping her scarf around his shoulders and giving him her umbrella. "Let's get you somewhere warm," she said softly. At first he resisted, as if expecting punishment or rejection, but eventually he let her guide him to her apartment. She dried him off, made a warm cup of tea, and let him sit close, safe from the cold. The boy looked at her with wide eyes, a mixture of gratitude and disbelief. You always help me," he whispered. She smiled gently. "Yes, because you deserve it." Over the following months, her commitment grew deeper. She began teaching him small things, how to read better, simple math, and little life skills that he had never learned at home. She noticed how eager he was to absorb knowledge, how proud he felt when he could read a full page without stumbling, how his eyes sparkled when he counted numbers correctly. Every achievement, no matter how small, was celebrated. She made sure he knew that learning was a tool, a way to give him power over his life, and that he had the right to dream beyond the fear and neglect he had known. At times, the boy's trauma surfaced in unexpected ways. He would wake up from nightmares screaming, or he would flinch at loud noises or refuse to eat because he didn't trust the food. She handled these moments with patience and care, never scolding, never forcing. She learned to read his cues, the tightening of his fists, the slight shaking of his shoulders, the way he avoided eye contact. She adapted, making each day a little safer, a little more predictable, so he could slowly rebuild a sense of security that had been stripped from him. Even the simple act of walking outside became a challenge. He would cling to her hand tightly, fearful of strangers, of cars, of loud voices. She guided him patiently, allowing him to move at his own pace, explaining each step, pointing out friendly faces, and occasionally holding his hand a little longer than usual, just to reassure him that he was safe. In these moments, she saw the depth of his pain and the courage it took simply to exist in the world. Her own life became intertwined with his, in ways that were exhausting but rewarding. She worked long hours to make ends meet, yet she always found time to ensure he was cared for. She often went without things she needed, skipping a new coat in winter or a treat for herself, so she could provide a small comfort for him. And though it was tiring, she never complained. The boy's small smiles, his tentative trust, and the tiny victories of his daily life were reward enough. One day, the boy made a small but significant gesture. He handed her a crumpled piece of paper on which he had drawn a picture of the two of them sitting together. It was simple, drawn with crayons, imperfect but full of meaning. She felt tears prick her eyes as she took it, recognizing that in his own way he was acknowledging her presence, her care, and her protection. That drawing became a symbol of the fragile trust and bond they had built together. A reminder that even in the darkest times, small gestures could carry immense significance. But the path was never smooth. The boy sometimes expressed anger, confusion, and fear, sometimes lashing out at her in small ways because he didn't know how else to express the emotions he carried. She never took it personally. Instead, she held him, talked him through the feelings, and reassured him that it was okay to feel upset. She knew that healing was not linear, that every step forward might be followed by a step back, and she was willing to walk that path with him, no matter how long it took. As the months rolled on, she realized that her intervention had begun to make a difference. The boy laughed more often, even if quietly. He started speaking in longer sentences, asking questions and showing curiosity about the world beyond the street corners and empty lots. He began to believe, just a little, that he could have a life different from the one he had known. A life with safety, care, and hope. Despite the victories, there were constant reminders of the danger he faced at home. She received anonymous threats, warnings from neighbors, and even hints that his guardians had noticed her involvement. But her resolve never wavered. She learned to navigate the risks carefully, ensuring the boy's immediate safety while continuing to build the trust and skills he needed to survive and thrive. Through it all, she never let the world's cruelty overshadow the small joys they found together. A warm meal, a book read aloud, a joke shared, or simply sitting side by side watching the sunset. These moments became the pillars of their growing bond. Moments that reminded them both that kindness and safety were not impossible, even in a harsh world. And as the boy began to trust her more fully, she knew that the next steps would be just as challenging, if not more. The fight for his long-term safety, the involvement of social services, the possibility of legal battles, all loomed ahead. But for now she focused on the present, on making sure he ate, slept, learned, and began to feel a sense of self-worth. That was her mission, and she embraced it fully, knowing that every small act of care was a step toward changing the trajectory of a life that had been marked by pain and neglect. Even in exhaustion, she felt a quiet pride. The boy, once trembling with fear at every passing sound, now laughed softly at her stories, asked questions about life, and occasionally even reached out to hug her. Those small gestures were monumental victories, evidence that a life touched by kindness could begin to heal. And she held on to that, knowing that patience, consistency, and unwavering care could slowly but surely build a foundation of safety, trust, and hope. Time passed slowly, and the boy grew a little stronger each day. He began to speak more, laugh more, and even look at the world around him with cautious curiosity instead of fear. But life had other plans. One afternoon, the woman received a call from social services. They had arranged a new foster placement for him. The woman felt her heart tighten at the news. She had always known this day might come, but she had hoped it would be far in the future. When she told the boy, he didn't say much at first. His small face grew pale, and he clutched at her hand tightly, as if letting go of her would somehow make the world collapse around him. She knelt down to his level, brushing a stray strand of hair from his forehead. "This doesn't mean we're ending our time together," she said softly. "It means you're going to be safe in a home where people can look after you every day. But I'll always be here for you no matter what." The days leading up to the move were quiet but full of small, heavy moments. She tried to make the boy feel at ease, keeping their routines as normal as possible. They still read stories, had their small meals together, and shared laughs over little jokes. But behind the smiles, there was a silent understanding. Things were about to change forever. On the day he was to leave, she held him close, feeling the weight of the years they had shared. She remembered the first time. She had seen him trembling on the curb, alone in the world. Back then, she had wondered if anyone would ever care about him, if he would ever know what it felt like to be safe. Now, as he stood before her, ready to step into a new home, she felt a mix of pride and sorrow. He was leaving the small world they had built together, but he was also moving towards safety, stability, and a chance at a better life. As they said goodbye, he looked up at her with wide eyes, filled with both fear and gratitude. Will you come see me?" he asked quietly. She nodded, holding back tears. "I promise. I will always be here for you." And in that moment she realized that their bond was unbreakable. No distance, no time, no circumstances could undo the trust and care they had built. The boy moved into his new foster home, a place with warm walls, proper meals, and people trained to care for children. The adjustment was not easy. He had spent so much of his life in fear that trusting new adults took time. There were nights when he cried quietly in his room, missing the woman who had been his anchor, the only person who had truly understood him. But he also remembered the lessons she had taught him: to speak up when afraid, to hold on to hope, and to believe that kindness existed in the world. Months turned into years. The boy grew taller, stronger, and more confident. He started school, made friends, and began to find joy in activities he had never experienced before. He discovered books and stories that transported him to new worlds, fueling his imagination and curiosity. He found strength in learning, using education as a way to carve a better future for himself. And through it all, he carried the memory of the woman who had saved him, the woman who had shown him what it meant to be cared for. Even when the world seemed cruel, the woman continued her own life quietly. She went to work each day, carried out her routines, and occasionally thought about the boy. Sometimes she wondered how he was doing, hoping that he felt safe and happy in his new home. She knew she had done everything she could for him, but a part of her always wished she could see him more often, hear his voice, and know that he was thriving. Even though they were apart, their connection remained strong. She kept letters and drawings he had given her, small reminders of the bond they shared. Every time she looked at them, she felt a quiet sense of pride. She had taken a child from a place of fear and pain and given him a glimpse of safety, love, and hope. That alone felt like a victory, even if life had forced them to be apart. The boy never forgot her either. Her lessons, her kindness, and her unwavering presence shaped the way he viewed the world. He began to dream of a future where he could give back, where he could help others in the way she had helped him. The woman's influence became a guiding force, a reminder that one act of courage and compassion could change the course of a life. As he grew older, he faced challenges, but he approached them with resilience. School was not always easy. Friendships sometimes faltered, and the scars of his past occasionally resurfaced. But he carried with him the lessons of patience, trust, and hope that the woman had instilled in him. He remembered her words during his darkest moments, how she had encouraged him to keep going, to believe in himself, and to never give up, no matter how hard life became. Years went by, and the boy became a young adult. He graduated from school, pursued higher education, and began building a life for himself. He found work, developed skills, and slowly, steadily, started to feel the sense of control over his life that had been missing for so long. And through every achievement, every milestone, every small victory, he thought of her, the woman who had given him a chance when the world had failed to notice him. He also began to understand the depth of her sacrifice. She had risked her safety, faced judgment from others, and invested her time, energy, and love into someone who had nothing to give in return but trust. She had chosen to care when caring was dangerous, to act when action was difficult, and to remain patient when patience was tested. Her bravery and compassion had laid the foundation for the life he was now building. But as the years passed, he realized something else. He wanted to repay her. He wanted to show her that her kindness had not been forgotten, that the impact of her actions had not faded. He wanted to give back in a way that would honor the sacrifices she had made, even if he could never fully repay what she had done. The idea grew in his mind quietly at first, then more insistently, until he knew he had to act, and so he began planning. He wanted the reunion to be meaningful, not just a simple thank you. He wanted to show her the difference she had made, to let her see the life she had helped create, and to honor her in a way that words alone could not. He thought about how she had taught him patience, resilience, and hope, and he realized that her influence had shaped every decision he had made, every opportunity he had pursued, and every success he had achieved. Meanwhile, the woman continued her life, unaware of the plans forming in the young man's mind. She had moved forward quietly, finding fulfillment in her own work and in the small joys of daily life. She did not expect anything in return for the years of care she had given him. Her satisfaction came from knowing that she had done the right thing, that she had protected a child in need, and that she had shown him what it meant to be cared for. But life has a way of bringing people together in ways they cannot anticipate. And as the young man's plans grew clearer, The moment of reunion drew closer. Both of them, though living separate lives, carried the memory of those early years. The struggles, the small victories, the moments of fear and trust, the slow building of a bond that neither time nor distance could break. It was in these quiet, reflective years that the seeds of something extraordinary were planted. A bond forged through courage, patience, and compassion was about to bear fruit in a way neither of them could have imagined when they first met. And though the woman did not yet know it, the young man she had saved was preparing to return the kindness that had shaped his life, to show her that one act of bravery could indeed change everything. Even now, years after the initial rescue, the memory of the boy's small, cautious smile, the warmth of his hand in hers, and the quiet moments they had shared remained vivid in her mind. She remembered the fear in his eyes, the hesitation in his voice, and the fragile trust he had slowly given her. Those memories were a reminder that kindness once offered could echo through time, shaping lives in ways that could never be measured. And the boy, now a young man, carried the same memories. The first time she had given him food, the moments she had stayed with him through his fear, the patience and care that had slowly allowed him to believe in safety and love. These memories became the foundation of his desire to repay her, to honor the life she had given him, and to ensure that her sacrifices were recognized in a way that truly mattered. Though their paths had diverged, the connection between them remained unbroken. The boy had grown, but the lessons she had taught him, the trust she had nurtured, and the hope she had instilled remained as strong as ever. And it was this enduring connection that would guide the next chapter of their lives, a chapter where gratitude, courage, and the power of human kindness would come together in a way that neither of them could have predicted. Years had passed since the young man had first left her care, yet the memory of her kindness never left him. Every accomplishment, every small victory in life, carried the echo of the woman who had saved him from fear and pain. He had built a stable life for himself, worked hard, and pursued his dreams. But there was always one thought in the back of his mind. He owed her a debt that could never be measured in money or gifts. He wanted her to know that the years of care, love, and protection she had given him had not been forgotten. One quiet morning, he decided it was time. He packed a small bag, making sure he had nothing unnecessary, only the essentials. His heart was racing, a mix of excitement and nervousness. He remembered the timid, scared boy he once had been, and he wondered what she would think when she saw the man he had become. He rehearsed his words over and over in his mind, wanting to express everything he felt without overwhelming her. Every step of the way, he felt the weight of gratitude and anticipation pressing on him. Meanwhile, the woman continued her routine, unaware that her past was about to return to her doorstep. She had settled into her life, still caring deeply for others, quietly helping wherever she could, but her days were ordinary and predictable. She had long since wondered about the boy, hoping he had found safety and happiness, but she never expected him to come back into her life in the way that was about to happen. The knock at her door came unexpectedly. It was early in the afternoon, and she had been tidying her small apartment, humming softly to herself. When she opened the door, a man stood there dressed neatly with a gentle smile on his face. For a moment she didn't recognize him, but then she saw the familiar spark in his eyes, the same cautious yet trusting look she had once seen in a much smaller version of him. "Excuse me," he said softly, his voice steady but carrying emotion. "I don't know if you remember me, but you helped me years ago." Her heart skipped a beat. She studied his face carefully, memories flooding back, the small, scared boy, the timid smiles, the times she had stayed by his side through fear and pain. "Eli?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. He nodded, and a small emotional smile appeared on his face. It had been years since she last saw him, but it was him, the boy she had cared for, nurtured, and protected, now grown into a man standing at her doorstep, wanting to repay the kindness she had shown. He stepped forward cautiously, as if testing the ground, unsure how she would react. She opened the door wider, her eyes filled with tears, and gestured for him to come inside. For a moment they simply looked at each other, absorbing the passage of time, the growth, the shared history that had led them to this moment. The silence was heavy with emotion, yet comforting, filled with unspoken understanding. He began to speak, telling her about his life, carefully choosing words to convey both gratitude and respect. He shared stories of his school years, the challenges he had faced and the victories he had achieved. He spoke of the moments when he had felt fear creeping back, and how he remembered her lessons, her patience, and her unwavering presence, which had given him the strength to keep going. With every word, the woman listened, her heart swelling with pride and relief. She realized that her years of care had truly made a difference, shaping a life that had once been fragile and uncertain. They talked for hours, recounting memories of the past, the small, quiet moments on the steps of her apartment, the meals they had shared, the books they had read together, and the laughter that had slowly returned to his life. They smiled at the small victories, laughed at the moments of awkwardness, and even shed tears as they remembered the fear and uncertainty he had once faced. In those moments, the years apart disappeared, and it felt as though no time had passed at all. The young man's gratitude was palpable. He wanted to repay her, not with simple words, but with actions that would honor her sacrifices. He spoke about ways he had thought of to help her, to make her life a little easier, to show her that her kindness had created ripples far beyond what she could have imagined. He explained that her support had not only saved him, but had inspired him to live a life of integrity, compassion, and purpose. She listened quietly, humbled by his words, feeling a mixture of pride and disbelief. She had never expected repayment. Her actions had been driven by a simple desire to protect a child in need. And yet, here was a man who had carried her kindness like a torch through years of uncertainty, wanting to give back in every way he could. The room seemed to hum with the weight of their shared history, the unspoken bond of care and trust that had endured despite the distance and years apart. As they spoke, she noticed the subtle changes in him, the confidence in his posture, the clarity in his voice, the quiet strength that radiated from him. He was no longer the frightened boy who had huddled in corners, uncertain of what the world held. He was a man who had faced adversity, who had survived and who had thrived, carrying the lessons of compassion and patience she had taught him. And she realized that her efforts, her sacrifices, and her unwavering care had not been in vain. The young man had also brought a small collection of gifts, carefully chosen to reflect her interests and needs. It wasn't the kind of lavish reward one might imagine. It was thoughtful, meaningful, and personal. He had remembered her love for books, her quiet enjoyment of gardening, her preference for practical items that made life a little easier. Each gift was a reflection of his gratitude, a tangible representation of the impact she had had on his life. Yet more than the gifts, it was the conversation, the presence, and the shared memories that mattered most. They laughed together at small moments, recalled times of fear and courage, and reflected on how far they had both come. She saw in him the resilience, intelligence, and kindness she had hoped to nurture. He saw in her the bravery, patience, and unwavering compassion that had shaped his life and allowed him to survive against the odds. As the day turned into evening, the young man made a decision. He wanted to ensure that her life was made a little brighter, that her sacrifices were acknowledged in ways she might never expect. He spoke about creating opportunities for her, helping her with her work, and supporting her in ways that would make her day-to-day life easier. She protested at first, insisting that she had done nothing extraordinary, that she had only done what anyone in her position would have done, but he shook his head gently. "You gave me my life," he said, his voice steady and heartfelt. "You showed me what it means to care, to trust, to hope. I can never fully repay you, but I want to try. I want you to know that your kindness made a difference that lasts a lifetime. And I want to be here for you, just as you were here for me." The woman's eyes filled with tears, and she could barely find words to respond. She had never expected this. She had acted out of love, out of compassion. And yet here was a young man, once a frightened child, standing before her with gratitude so deep and sincere that it almost overwhelmed her. For the first time in years, she felt the profound impact of her actions, not just in the boy's survival, but in the fullness of the life he had built because of her. They spent the evening talking about their future together, about small ways they could support one another, and about the enduring bond that had carried them through years of separation. They laughed, they cried, and they remembered the moments that had brought them to this reunion. And in that quiet apartment, filled with the warmth of their shared history, they both understood something important. Kindness, courage, and love could create ripples that extend far beyond the moment, shaping lives in ways that could never be measured. The young man stayed that night, helping her with chores, sharing stories, and simply being present. It was a moment of connection that neither of them had realized they needed so deeply. For her, it was a chance to see the boy she had saved grown into a man full of gratitude and strength. For him, it was an opportunity to express the depth of his thanks, to show her that her sacrifices had mattered, and to honor her with presence, care, and respect. As the night drew on, they both knew that this reunion was only the beginning. The years of separation, the struggles of the past, and the challenges they had both faced had led to this moment of healing and acknowledgement, and as they sat together, sharing quiet laughter and tears, they understood that some bonds, forged in moments of courage and care, could never be broken. In the days that followed, the young man continued to visit, helping in small ways, offering support, and sharing the successes of his life. They built new routines together, creating a life that celebrated the past while embracing the future. And through every conversation, every shared meal, every small act of kindness, they both realized the truth. The power of compassion and courage could ripple through a lifetime, leaving marks that time could never erase. The days after their reunion were filled with small, meaningful moments. The young man, who had once been a frightened child clinging to her for safety, now stood as a grown adult eager to repay her kindness. He helped around her small apartment, fixing things that had needed repair for years, arranging her living space to make it more comfortable, and even cooking meals together. Each small act was filled with thoughtfulness, a reflection of the gratitude and care he felt for the woman who had saved his life. She watched him with a mixture of surprise and humility. She had never expected anything in return for the years of care and protection she had given him. She had acted out of love and compassion, without thought of reward. Yet here he was, determined to show her that every sacrifice, every late night, every moment of worry had mattered. It was a lesson she had always hoped he would carry with him. That kindness given freely can create ripples far beyond the moment. They spent long afternoons together, talking about life, sharing memories and planning small ways to make the woman's daily life easier. He would help with chores, run errands, and even accompany her to appointments, offering support in ways she had never imagined. But more than anything, he gave her the gift of his presence. For years, she had wondered if he was safe, if he was happy, if he had found his place in the world. Now she could see the man he had become, confident, kind, and strong, shaped in part by the care she had given him so long ago. It wasn't only about material help. He also encouraged her to pursue small dreams she had long set aside, plans to take short trips, start a small garden in her courtyard, or even take a class she had always been curious about. He reminded her that she deserved joy, that she had spent so many years giving to others that it was time to allow herself moments of happiness too. At first she resisted, hesitant to accept such gestures, but he was gentle, persistent, and patient. Slowly, she began to embrace these small opportunities, realizing that accepting kindness was not a betrayal of her principles, but a celebration of the life she had helped nurture in him. Their bond deepened with each passing day. They shared meals together, laughing over small jokes, recounting stories from the past, and reflecting on how far they had both come. She noticed how carefully he listened, how attentive he was to her needs, and how genuinely he cared about her well-being. In turn, he noticed the quiet strength in her, the resilience that had allowed her to